Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are getting into Avengers Volume 2. Again, like we're kind of playing catch up here. I didn't even realize, I went back and looked at my uploads. I didn't realize there was a point where I didn't upload for almost a month, but I had a lot of things going on. Anyway, so catching up with Avengers. This comes in the aftermath of the final host. Now, for those of you guys who have not seen my video on the final host, you'll find that down in the description. But that was basically Jason Aaron kind of retconning everything and saying like the origins of like all life on Earth stemmed from like the first Celestial that ever showed up here and then basically bled all over the place. But what this issue does, really the first issue number 8 of Avengers, really just kind of fleshes out the Avengers team as it exists now. There's not a lot doing here, and it's really kind of Jason Aaron just sort of setting the stage. As it stands right now, the existing roster of the Avengers are composed of Doctor Strange, who's kind of in and out, Black Panther, Captain America, Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, you've got She-Hulk. You basically kind of have like the normal runabout of teammates that you would expect to see. Thor, of course, is a mainstay, has been for quite some time. But the big kind of takeaway from all this, from really the first issue, is one, Black Panther is made the chairman of the team, which is a big departure from history in Marvel Comics. Captain America's always been the leader of the Avengers team. And it's kind of cool to kind of put Black Panther in that role because Black Panther is one, exceedingly intelligent. He's also stupid rich. And then at the same time, like he's wildly capable, probably more capable than Captain America is in terms of his abilities and what he can do. But one of the other big things that comes from this is basically Roxxon Oil. Now, Roxxon is not a corporation that we talk about all that often in Marvel Comics, and you guys have probably seen it referenced in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But Roxxon Oil is one of these like multinational corporations that's just like corrupt as hell. Like that's basically what it is. Like they're just like the super corrupt organization that literally just does almost anything that they want to do. But in this instance, they're basically hunting for various forms of wildlife. We're not told explicitly what they're doing, but whatever they're doing is basically pissed off the Atlanteans. The result is that like 3 of them end up attacking. And when they do, Roxxon Oil kills them and then strings them up and basically hangs them from the side of the ship, which pisses off Namor the Submariner. Now, this is kind of the crazy thing because Namor the Submariner is usually reserved. And what ends up happening here in this instance is like he literally snaps. And what he's done is sworn like all surface dwellers are not to be here. And he actually ends up summoning Stingray. Of course, Stingray goes way back, in the Namor stories, and they were friends at one point, but he literally beats him within an inch of his life and says no one from the surface world can be here. But the fact remains that it's one of these things where Namor is basically kind of sworn a vendetta against the surface world is basically what's going on here. Now, on the surface, it would be easy to dismiss this. And the reason why is because Namor's never really been considered like a worthwhile character. And I mean, depending on the circumstance he has, but Namor is one of those characters where I always found to be interesting when he wasn't really fighting per se, but when you focus on the nature of his character. That's what made him so cool during Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, is there was a lot of like dialogue focusing on him and the fact that like, I'll do whatever it takes to win. For most people, it's very easy to kind of write off Namor the Submariner. And so for Namor fans, this is kind of like see, like I told you Namor was legit. And he really is. The funny thing about him is that Namor is more often than not seen on the surface. But when Namor's in the ocean, he's a hoss. And that's the funny thing is because Namor basically intends to like literally take all these soldiers, these guys from Roxxon who kill the Atlanteans and execute them himself. Now the Avengers are here, and the reason why is because the Avengers are kind of like a safety measure here. Because if word got out that Namor the Submariner took surface dwellers, took them down to Atlantis, and then killed them, that would spark a war with the surface. Like literally it would be like, okay, so like all bets are off. And the Atlanteans would go to war with the surface. But when the Avengers show up, they're like, you have to hand the prisoners over. We're trying to avoid a conflict. And Namor's response is no. And literally goes toe to toe with all the Avengers. He crushes Thor's hammer with his bare hands. He wrecks Captain Marvel by her, like literally crushes her. She-Hulk gets like completely and totally overwhelmed. He totally overwhelms Ghost Rider, Robbie Reyes. I mean, everyone who goes, like every single member of the Avengers who goes before Namor falls. And ultimately, it's all kind of stopped by Captain America. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing here because what Jason Aaron does is instead of sort of copping out, he plays on the role of Captain America. And what I mean by that is in Marvel Comics, while I don't really consider Captain America to be wildly interesting in and of himself, although the current like Winter in America story is actually pretty cool. But the cool thing about this is that Captain America's reputation sort of precedes him. And so it's one of these things where it's like, okay, because you're Captain America, I will listen to you, but only because you're Captain America. Because Captain America is usually diplomacy first, fighting second. And so it makes sense that like when Captain America steps up, that is, I don't want to fight you, like I want to have a conversation. And so really it's kind of Jason Aaron sort of stopping the conflict and then letting things sort of continue. But remember, Namor's in his home territory. I mean, they're fighting on his territory, right? Like the art of war, fight on your own territory. And like he could easily dismantle all the Avengers, take them apart piece by piece, and send them limping back to the surface. And what Captain America basically says is, look, we want to avoid a conflict. The surface will attack if you kill these guys. You don't want any more bloodshed. We don't want any more bloodshed. Give us these guys, hand them over. We'll take them to the surface. You have my word that they'll get justice. And this is why Namor hates the surface world so much, is because while this is a diplomatic solution, in reality, Namor doesn't get anything out of it. He just gets the word of Captain America that justice will be served. But this is like somebody breaking into your house and then killing your loved ones. And then in the moment when like you want to kill them, the cops show up and say, no, you can't kill that person. Justice has to be served. But what justice is there? An eye for an eye. They killed your loved ones, you kill them, done. And it's kind of a crazy thing. Of course, that sort of creates an argument where it sort of spins out into like lawlessness and violence reigning supreme. And while violence is not the answer, it is a answer, and it's a very effective answer. And so it's one of these cool little scenarios here, because Namor's pissed off about that. And so when these guys are basically sent off to a federal penitentiary, what Namor does, and it's one of the coolest things ever, what Namor does is literally like send water just backflowing through the toilet in their prison cell and just floods the prison cell and they drown. Now everybody knows that Namor the Submariner is the one who's doing this, and in response to that, what Namor does is he basically assembles the Defenders of the Deep. Now, the Defenders of the Deep here are not super relevant. I mean, characters like Tiger Shark and Orca go way back, different things like that. But of one particular interest here is basically like Echidna. Now, Echidna is the chick who looks like she's like part eel, part woman. She kind of looks like the Joker a little bit. She is super OP. And here's one of the funny things about this is more often than not, when it comes to stuff like that, okay, so take for example, like Agamotto, right? Kind of sidetrack here for a second. The character of Agamotto was the original Sorcerer Supreme back before Marvel Legacy #1 launched, and we got like Avengers 1 million BC. Agamotto was confirmed to have been the original Sorcerer Supreme. And one of the things about this that sort of intrigued me is people always reference like the Marvel Encyclopedia, like the Marvel Handbook. Marvel Tarot #1 from 2007 explains all that. And that's one of the things that it explains about Echidna, is that she's a character who literally is on par with Zeus. She's a powerhouse. And it's one of these things where it's like you don't easily go through and just like face off against her, right? I mean, she can really hold her own in a lot of different ways. And that's exactly what happens. Like Namor brings the entire kingdom of Atlantis to the surface. And then in turn, like the Avengers have to respond. The problem with this is that all this is set off by an address that Namor makes, basically saying, look, the Avengers caused this. Like all the Avengers had to do was give me the guy from Roxxon Oil, everything would have been fine. But like, this is something that cannot be tolerated. I'm coming after everybody. And so because this General Thunderbolt Ross basically says, hey, look, the government's lost faith in you guys and you can do whatever you need to do. But like at the end of the day, we're calling in a separate team. And so what he does is basically say, contact the agent. Now, the funny thing about this is that this battle basically leads to like the risen kingdom of Atlantis between basically the Defenders of the Deep and the Avengers. And the fight's pretty cool for what it is. I mean, you're talking about some guys who are relatively even. Echidna should be able to crush most of these guys. I mean, like she's able to do her own thing, but it's kind of interesting to see. It's not a great big huge thing. This is really kind of pointing to the fact that this is one of those filler stories. It's a story that's kind of thrown in there for the purpose of like just showing us what the Avengers are doing at the time, but really like it's all kind of building to War of Realms is what a lot of this stuff is going into, but also like War of the Vampires, which is pretty cool. The other part of this is that because of the actions of Namor the Submariner and like launching an attack also affected the Black Sea, which is part of the Russian territories, what this does is it invokes the Winter Guard. Now, the Winter Guard aren't super important. In fact, they're here for like a hot minute. But for those of you guys who are unfamiliar, the Winter Guard was basically Russia's answer to the Avengers, is really what they were. But aside from that, like there really isn't a whole lot doing here. The battle happens pretty fast, and it really kind of comes down to a stalemate. It's literally like the Avengers and the Winter Guard, while they are kind of fighting each other to a degree, they end up turning against the Atlanteans, and that's when Namor basically calls a retreat and says, look, like we're going back, we'll marshal our forces, and we'll return yet again. And that's basically it. Not a whole lot doing. It happens pretty fast. The big takeaway from all this, and this is kind of the big important thing that goes on here, is really two big important things that go on here, is you've basically got Thunderbolt Ross, who's sitting in his office after the whole thing's popped off, and he's met by the arrival of the agent, who turns out to be Phil Coulson. Not only that, what Phil Coulson has done is basically assembled the Squadron Supreme of America, essentially like the Justice League. I mean, it literally looks just like him. That one chick looks exactly like Wonder Woman, but like it's essentially like Batman more or less. Like it's the Squadron Supreme. Like it's literally like the return of the Squadron Supreme. And it's kind of a cool little thing because what this does is this sort of spins out and transitions over to Loki. Now, a little bit of a follow-up here. For those of you guys who were unaware, after the first host and everything, when the final host story arc happened, Loki was the one who basically reassembled the Avengers against like the return of the Celestials. And at the end of the whole thing, the Celestials basically whisked him away. And we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know the basis behind it or what the intention or motivation was. But what basically ends up happening here is Loki is met by the arrival of Wolverine. Now, a little bit of an explanation here. This is kind of an explanation of sorts, and we may or may not end up covering it. I'm not 100% sure. But basically what happened in the Thor comics, as Jason Aaron wrote them, is that you had like old King Thor, more or less, where really it's kind of like Odin, I guess, facing off against essentially like Wolverine from the future with the powers of the Phoenix Force. Force. When Marvel Legacy happened and you had Wolverine with like the Space Stone, I think it was, that it was actually like future Wolverine with the Phoenix Force powers. It was cool. The art was a little funky. It kind of felt like an unnecessary story, but what this basically does is confirm that it is kind of necessary. That essentially, like in this future, all hell breaks loose. That one, it looks like Malekith won the War of Realms. It seems like multiple people have the power of Starbrand. You end up having Hyperion, who basically like destroys the shield of Captain America. That all things seem to basically pop off. And it's really kind of Wolverine's way of saying, hey, look, like things are getting pretty, like things are getting very, very, very bad here. And so you have a very important role to serve. Again, kind of feeding into the War of Realms. How this transitions, we don't fully know. And we won't know until like the War of Realms actually happens. But then from there, what you basically do is pick up with Janet Van Dyne, who's kind of on this mission for what used to be S.H.I.E.L.D. more or less. And she basically infiltrates like this crazy dark vampire kind of place, only for her to basically recruit Blade and to simply ask Blade whether or not he wants to join the Avengers, which is kind of cool because Blade's finally making his return in Marvel Comics after, well, really after more than like a cameo. I want to say maybe he appeared like 4 times since like Secret Wars. And even then, like I'm not even 100% sure. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.